I'm just saying I'm not finished yet. Search for it, swing for it, discover the me that lives in yes. Stand for it, stretch for it. It's my time, imagine my best. Run for it, reach for it, uncover the me that lives in yes. I know, yes I know, there'll be miracles wherever I go. It's not work, it's play. I can make magic today. Go for it, go for it.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to Senior Nation. I'm your host, Phyllis Ayman, and you are listening to the Source TV Radio Network, WTSN, Washington, D.C. We are indeed a senior nation with 100 plus million adults over the age of 50. And we are here to bring you up-to-date information about successful aging, healthful longevity, and becoming what I call a well-ager, to dignity, respect, quality of life, and quality of care for our parents, grandparents, and loved ones. We at Senior Nation will be your trusted voice for informed choices, meaningful conversations, and a vibrant life at every age. Though the Source TV Radio Network is known for its dedication to bringing the highest level of jazz content to the viewer and listening audience, the owners of the network are also dedicated to bringing this important content to this fast-growing demographic. And I am deeply grateful to have this opportunity. So let's begin with today's show. My guest tonight is Jody Holtzman, founder and senior managing partner of Longevity Venture Advisors, where he works with innovative entrepreneurs, venture investors, public companies, and nonprofit organizations to successfully leverage business and investment opportunities in the $8.3 trillion longevity economy. He is a recognized expert and thought leader on health innovation and products and services of relevance to the aging population and the opportunities and challenges presented by this demographic wave. In honor of his contributions, he was recognized as a top 50 influencer in aging by Next Avenue NPR. He has over 3 decades of experience helping companies grow by developing and implementing competitive strategies and achieving their strategic market goals. Jody was previously AARP's Senior Vice President of Thought Leadership and Market Innovation, where he conceived and built the first program to spark innovation in the market that benefits people over 50. In this role, he envisioned and developed the concept and market category of this $8.3 trillion longevity economy. So I'm so thrilled to have Jody Holtzman here with me today.
Hi, Phyllis.
Hi, Jody. Great to see you.
Same here.
And it's so terrific to be able to bring this conversation to the listener and viewer audience because, you know, nowadays people, think, why do we have all these older people and, what contributions do they make? They have this vision of what older people are. So I couldn't think of anybody better than you to explain why this demographic, you and I are amongst them, right, is so valuable.
Well, it's valuable on many levels. The longevity, but the value's not recognized. And although there's aspects of it that are changing, and I have seen change in the last 15 years in particular, but the value the case for the value still needs to be made. And if the current political situation doesn't bring that home, where there's discussion about we aren't going to cut or reduce benefits in Medicare, Social Security, Medicaid. These are current debates, and they're driven by an all too common belief and assumption, which is true, both sides of the aisle, which is kind of fascinating. They have different solutions, but they agree on this same incorrect point, which is that we can't afford all these old people. Nobody puts it like that. Nobody says it so bluntly. But that's what underlies all of this. There's this assumption that we as a society economically cannot support this growing wave of older people. And I'll just point out, globally, 2022 was the first time when we crossed over. There are now more people over 50 in the world than there are people under 50.
Correct.
So if these numbers aren't getting people's attention, they really are asleep at the wheel. But I can give you some more background as we.
Yeah, no, I want to hear more background. Actually, also, you and I discussed this. There are 10,000 people every day turning 65 between now and 2034, I think it is.
I think it's 30, but yeah.
30? Okay. And then it's by 2030, I think, the over 65 population will overtake the under 18 population, and that the fastest growing demographic is 80 and above. Is that all correct information?
I believe so. And the over 80 and above is interesting for many reasons. One, when you and I have talked about it, it's the fastest growing because it starts with the lowest, a small number. So you have this, incredible growth rate. But the more interesting thing is there are more people on the planet today over 85 than any other time in the history of humanity. And so what is it about that? And, this is like the miraculous fact of the 20th century, where we saw longevity, the length of one's lifetime, more than double, in age, going from 1900 till 2000. So, and then of course we've had some changes to that as a result of COVID, as a result of the opioid epidemic. There have been other things that have gotten in the way of this more constant and incremental change in longevity, in the longevity age. But when I first got into this, I was struck, by this notion in DC. I was working at AARP at the time, and I had just gotten this new role. I had been the head of research for AARP. And in a reorg, they created this thought leadership program, which I was asked to create. And I was just like, fishing for what could we do. There wasn't any shortage of research at AARP. It's all long been known as a great source of information on the 50 plus. But I started grappling with this thing that I was hearing about, we have to cut Medicare, we have to cut Social Security, blah, blah, blah. And so, I would push back at people, and I would call them out. I'm saying, so you're saying that we as a society cannot afford all these old people, and push them, and then say, okay, I agree. We cannot afford all these old people. I say, well, where's the evidence?
Right.
You're making an economic claim. Where's the evidence? And to a person, regardless of politics, they would all say the same two things. Well, look at Medicare. Look at Social Security. They're unsustainable. Well, the epiphany was when I realized that they were making an economic claim, but their evidence was a design function of these two programs.
Huh.
I could design either one of those programs so that it's sustainable. It wouldn't be politically viable, but from a design standpoint, you raise taxes enough, you increase the age of eligibility. I mean, there's a bunch of levers you could pull to make it sustainable. But what it concretized for me was this is a design function you're talking about. You're not talking about economics, but it begged the question, if that isn't the data, if that isn't the evidence, what is the evidence? What is the economic contribution? How do you envision that? And so I hired Oxford Economics that first year. That was in 2012. And I gave them the following charge. If you were to envision a standalone national economy, it could have all national economies economically have the same attributes, job growth, revenue growth, new corporate investment, et cetera, et cetera. It's the same whether it's Barbados, China, the US, or the UK. All of those attributes are the same. So I said, so if you were to envision in the US a standalone national economy, but this one was solely driven economically by consumer spending of people over 50, what would the GDP be? And the first year we did it, it was 7.3 trillion, making it the third largest economy in the world after the US and China. And that third place rankings has stayed the same at the same time as the numbers have grown, both the GDP for US and China as well. And now the most recent study that was done after I left AARP, I think was in 2020. And, when they punched the buttons and it came up at $8.3 trillion. But it wasn't only that. We did an economic impact analysis, which is a standard model to understand economic impact, just as it said. And there's all sorts of critiques of different models. There's not an economic model where there isn't a critique. But the fact is, if you want to see the ripple effects of any economic activity, these models are very useful for that. And so we felt that that was a good model to use to demonstrate just the scale of what the heck, is going on. And the reality was that the numbers generated by the consumer spending of people over 50 exceed what's spent on Medicare, what's spent on Social Security. The numbers are just huge. And not only, just GDP, but they generate, the last numbers are down here, $2.1 trillion in tax revenue, 1.4 trillion in federal taxes, and 650 billion in state and local taxes. It's responsible for generating almost $90 million jobs. Those aren't jobs for people over 50, although some of them may be.
Right.
For everybody.
Right.
For incomes, because older people are spending money.
Right. So I have a question about that that I asked you earlier, but somebody just, Charles made this comment that 70% of our economy is consumerism.
Yep.
56 cents of every dollar spent came from someone 50 or older. Kill income programs to those over 55 and you kill the economy.
That's it. And he's exactly right, Charles.
Correct.
You're exactly right. In fact, and those numbers are just going to increase. The share of total spend by people over 50, over 65, in fact, the fastest growing is going to be people over 65 who have the biggest spend, both in the US and globally. And those numbers that you're citing there are just going to get even bigger.
So I asked you this question earlier today that someone actually asked me, and maybe it's part and parcel what you've already explained, but in case anybody is thinking about this, I'll ask you again. So if they, is some of the expenditure, the Medicaid that's allocated for the older population and Medicare and Social Security, is that part of this $8.3 trillion economy because of all of the goods and services that those monies go to support that demographic, whether they're in nursing homes or home care agencies, caregivers, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera?
So in the analysis, Social Security is included as income. It's
Right.
part of income. There's about a third of, I believe the number is about a third of Social Security beneficiaries depend almost solely on that. But 2/3 of Social Security beneficiaries have other sources of income, either savings, pensions, or 401ks, or something of that sort. It's a huge range, as with every other economic class case in the United States and everywhere. So so that is part of income. The other things are part of the economy, of the longevity economy, because at the end of the day, the longevity economy is about a day in the life of somebody over 50. And what do? And they are both consumers, but they are also contributors. And so it's not so simple as, I think it was Romney originally, talking about takers. This population that some other numbers I have here. Where is oh, here it is. Yeah. Almost $750 billion worth of unpaid volunteering and caregiving.
Right.
That is $750 billion of freebie.
Correct.
To the economy.
Right.
To the economy. 97, almost 100 billion in charitable contributions. Right? Now they get a tax, write off for that. And they spent 135 billion on educational services, much of it for their children and grandchildren.
Right.
So, this notion, and let's just point out that Medicare, the total cost of Medicare in most recent year, 2024, was just under $840 billion. So let's go back to that tax revenue number. $1.4 trillion in federal taxes, and Medicare cost 850 less, just a little bit less. So right there, you're talking a surplus of, there's another $500 million, and most of that is covered right now, still out of the trust fund. So my view is that a lot of this is really an accounting challenge. That money is being allocated and recognized as being one thing, when if you were to look at it in a different way, I mean, just on the face of it, contributing $1.4 trillion in federal taxes annually, and the cost of Medicare is $850 billion. Well, why can't we afford Medicare? What do you mean? Expand it.
Right.
But that money generated by people over 50 is not viewed as going into the bucket, aside from whatever those Medicare, the Medicare taxes are. So once you start saying, well, wait a minute, the way we categorize monies, incomes, and expenditures, and how we, recognize those in the books, I think there's a lot of opportunity there, where you really do start to see that it is just stupid to not, be taking care of, this age cohort that is contributing trillions of dollars to the economy. It's volunteering, it's human capital, and it's an economic and a human capital resource and asset that is just not, fully leveraged.
So we have another comment here, Kent, who says, take away or reduce Social Security, Medicare, etc., and those over 55 will have to work longer, and that affects jobs and promotions for Gen Xers and soon Gen Z. So what's your take on that?
So I take the point. I think I disagree with it a little. I'll push back a little on this. I think that there are cases at a microeconomic level, in other words, at the level of the firm, of a company where this holds, where it does seem like there is a zero-sum number of jobs, and either they're filled by this group of people or that group of people or some combination. But my philosophical problem with this is that assumes there's no growth. This assumes that it just stays the same and it's always zero sum. And I don't think that's the character of the economy.
Huh, that's interesting. Actually, we have a nice little graphic here just about the longevity economy. And I think that people, I mean, this is to some people, maybe an elusive concept, but really seeing, this, as the front cover of an AARP magazine that is acknowledging and recognizing this economy as being important to our entire GDP. And like you said, if it was, and I never heard you explain how you came to have the longevity economy determined, as was such a great explanation how you went about it. But it is the third largest economy in the world after the United States and China, if it was a standalone. And that is
that's just in the United States.
Right.
Right. At a global level, it's 45 trillion.
Oh, wow.
It's 45 trillion and forecast. Where was it? Anyway, it's going to get bigger than that. It's really up there. Now, the interesting thing is that the global dynamics are very different, right? So, China is a country that has incredibly fast growing 50 plus population.
Correct.
The challenge that China has, that Europe, for example, which also, or Japan for that matter, the oldest society currently, the difference is that China is not a per capita rich country. And these other countries, just have greater per capita resources. So how that plays out is going to be, pretty interesting. And unfortunately in China also, all of the solutions are tied up, with the real estate market in China, which has just been, facing real headwinds for quite a number of years.
And just, what you're talking about, the globally we're aging. So, I'm a member of the United Nations NGO Committee on Aging, which addresses this issue of global aging because the entire planet is getting older. And how is every country around the world addressing this issue? Everyone is, addressing it in a different way, but is seen globally as a tremendous issue that needs to be addressed. And, that's, I was having a conversation with a woman the other day who started a home care agency that became a tri-state agency. And I will have her on the show at some point. And we were talking about the fact that, with an increasing number of older people in this country, if people continue to experience conditions that a lot of people think are associated with aging as a matter of course, which isn't, of course, the case actually, but just taking that at face value, that who's going to care for all these older people and where are these people going to come from? And that's probably a whole other conversation, but it's a conversation that needs to be had because, as you said, how many caregivers, family caregivers, are donating time that amounts to billions of dollars every year.
Typically it's there's a reason stereotypes exist is one of my mantras. And one of the stereotypes that does exist is that it's typically an older daughter-in-law, a niece, somebody who's a middle-aged woman who's taking care of older parents, aunts and uncles,
Right.
but that's just, it's not limited to them. There are 20 somethings that are caregivers. There are 30 somethings that are caregivers. It crosses all ages. I remember sitting around a table once. We were having this conversation when I was still at AARP about 10 years ago. And I would say the age range at the table was 25 to 60. Every single person had a caregiving story.
Right.
Every single individual.
Right.
And it wasn't hard. It was at the surface. I mean,
Right.
it was. You didn't have to go like remembering something.
Right.
It's a fact.
Well, the numbers are that 70% of the sandwich generation now is between 40 and 59, which are prime work years. My daughter just turned 45. She was part of that, that sandwich generation, having a family responsibility, intense job responsibilities, and having her father, my ex-husband, caring for him for the past several years, and how she felt just really, it's like you're in a vice. But, I always say that or corporations would, do well to address this issue, because between 40 and 59 are prime work years, your prime productive years. Right. And when you feel that way and you feel like you're in a vice, and I call it stretched, overwhelmed, and stretched, obviously affects a company's bottom line, which I think there was a Harvard research study that actually addressed that issue. I mean, can you speak about that?
Yeah, there's been a lot of research actually to show the corporate costs of caregiving challenges to their employees. First of all, when you're at work and all of a sudden you hear about an older loved one in distress or in need or whatever, you're not focused on the work.
Right.
It is a distraction for real, and legitimately so. So they're usually the self-insured companies, the larger companies. Some of them have, started to make available limited services within the context of their employee assistance programs, their
right.
EAPs, to help you find a caregiver in an emergency, and checklists and things like that. What's interesting is that on the innovation side of the longevity economy, which we can talk to, there are startup companies that have tried to sell into corporate, EAP programs, and to say, look, this is going to pay for itself because your first of all, your employees will thank you, and therefore it strengthens corporate loyalty. Two,
right.
actually reduces legitimate costs and distractions that prevent your top contributors being top contributors. So why wouldn't you? So the logic is there, and I think the case is still being made. There are no long-term studies of this stuff really, which is really in the long term what's going to have to happen to see an explosion of this. But I think it's really, really, really healthy. When I first got into this, I had the perspective that we needed to leverage the marketplace as a force multiplier for AARP's mission. It was all mission focused. This wasn't about making money, although there's opportunities to make money, lots of. But when I did this, it was, how can we achieve our mission? At that time, the mission was to improve the quality of life for all as we age. How can we, increase our approximation to that aspiration? And it was it's hard. It's really hard. But what I've seen over the last 15 years, 20 years, is has been an explosion of activity. There was just another venture capital fund that announced it closed its funding yesterday or the day before. A fund, I think, a little over 50 million to focus on early stage startups in what's called the age tech space. And there are several of them now. When I first, part of this leveraging the marketplace, I went to the National Venture Capital Association. So envision a Dilbert cartoon. A Dilbert cartoon is 3 panels. The first panel, my colleague and I are sitting on one side of a desk, and these 2 women are on the other side of the desk. They're from NVCA, National Venture Capital Association. And you see their faces and the back of my head and my colleague's head. And the 2 women have a thought bubble, each of them, above their heads. And the thought bubbles are talking to each other. This is the first panel. This is the Dilbert cartoon I envisioned from this experience.
Oh, okay.
And the thought bubbles are talking to them, and it says, "What the hell are they doing here?" Right? We're from AARP, and this was 2012, and we're at the National Venture Capital Association, and I tell them. And then the second panel, it switches. You see our faces, the back of their heads. And I say, we'd like to sponsor your annual event. Back, third panel looks just like the first panel, the 2 thought bubbles talking to each other. But now the thought bubble says, well, we're happy to take their money, but what the hell are they doing here?
I love it.
I go to the event. There wasn't a single person, most specifically, every individual, and they were all men, over 50, eligible for AARP membership. And once they saw I was there, my colleague was there, AARP was there, they could not help themselves. When they got on stage, they could not prevent themselves from telling an old joke or an AARP joke. And the ageism just poured from the stage. After that day, they came up to me from the NVCA and they're big smiles and they're like, so you're going to sponsor next year, right? And I'm like, and we should put ourselves through this again. Why?
Right.
And they said, well, you're the only ones here talking about growth opportunities.
Right.
And that was it. And then they asked me to write an article for their magazine, National Venture Capital Review. I came back the next year, no joke. And they asked me to write another article. And then we started seeing more funds pop up, focused on this area. Then I started running my own pitch competition for 6 years, a Shark Tank, we had over 1,100 applicants over the 6 years. We only put 70 on stage over that time in front of prospective investors, top VCs, and little by little, you started seeing more activity. And today, there really is, a budding and booming space that intellectually, financially, infrastructure, different support services, lots of different types of accelerators. I work with one, actually with 2, up in Toronto at the Center on Brain Health Innovation. In fact, we have a new group that are applying for their program just coming up in a couple of weeks. So there's been this incredible growth, and the market doesn't laugh anymore. I don't think it fully understands what it needs to do, but it doesn't laugh.
So we have another comment here from Kamidra. I hope I pronounced her name properly, or Kamedra. There are so many workers over age 55 who use their 401k and other investments in addition to salary and spending to fund the service economy, helping children buy houses, cars, college savings programs for grandchildren's vacations, etc. The recirculation of capital goes far beyond those over 55.
Exactly right.
Right.
You may have missed some of the data that I shared earlier, supportive of your point. People over 50 contributed $745 billion worth of unpaid activities, that's volunteering, caregiving, et cetera, 97 billion in charitable contributions in 2018. And they spent 135 billion on education services, including their children and grandchildren. And to your point, all of the things that you're saying and more.
Right.
So, you're absolutely right. And this is another example of how the traditional ways of understanding what's going on are lacking and unable to provide a framework to understand this, which was part of the purpose, for creating the concept of the longevity.
Yeah. Before we go, I wanted to bring up this next demographic, but before we do, I want to go back to a point that you made about employee assistance programs and people of every age that are involved in caregiving. So several years ago, I actually did some presentations for employee assistance programs. One was for the corporate headquarters of ESPN, and the other one was the Connecticut Department of Justice. Those were both in person, as well as doing some online for some online insurance companies. And I always start out with these questions, which is how many people here have an older parent or loved one? How many people here cared for one? How many people know somebody who is? How many people are concerned their older parent or loved one is going to need care? There were like 5 or 6 questions. And at the end of those questions, when you look into the audience, every person's hand was raised. And like you said, the age range in all of those workshops were from 25 probably to 60. Mm-hmm. And I would tell people, look around here. This is really the great equalizer. It doesn't matter where you're from, what country, what language, where you went to school, where you live. Everybody is experiencing this. And so that, I just wanted to reiterate, goes to your point of what you were saying. But we also have another great demographic from a cover that really addresses the different aspects of, the longevity economy, generating economic growth and new opportunities for business. And, can you talk about that cover a little bit? That was from, Oxford Economics.
Right. Both of the covers were from Oxford Economics. Here we were just trying to, just show some of the diversity of people. And, we're talking about over 100 million people in the United States alone. And it's represented. Pick the demographic cohort. Race, ethnicity,
right?
Straight hair, curly hair,
eyes,
blue eyes,
no hair, no hair. I'm just saying.
Thanks, Phyllis. So. We are representative of the whole country, and and that's really what the purpose of the choices were, on that cover. I mean, this is a country where a majority of children born today are children of color in this country.
Correct.
White children are not a majority of children born today.
Right.
So we're looking at changes. And, there's a lot of them, and they mix and they match and whatever, but it's like, okay, well, where's the upside of this? I used to have this saying that was only in Washington, where serving the needs of over 100 million people is called a economic cost and financial burden. In the
right.
Serving the needs of 100 million people is called an opportunity.
Right.
But we need to have the opportunity conversation, because once you frame it that way, it's a completely different conversation than the unaffordable cost and financial burden conversation. Then it's about additive. It's about, the upside. It's about the ripple effects, the positive ripple effect, whether it's on, job growth, revenue, and that kind of hard stuff, or it's about the positive ripple effects of intergenerational strength and respect. You were talking about that, at the outset, Phyllis. It's building those intergenerational ties, often between grandparents and grandchildren, but amongst all different people of different generations, whether they're related or not, because those kids hear stories about their friends' grandparents, and
Correct.
they're pulled into a conversation. Well, they're not like mine, or they are. Oh, my grandmother did the same thing. Yeah. So I believe that, depending on the approach you bring to the conversation, making assumptions explicit and transparent. This is one of those areas. It's always important to do that. Any conversation, any debate, especially. This is one, given the centrality of the debate around, quote, entitlements, which is not going away, that debate. The underlying assumptions of the different positions are never made explicit and transparent. And that's really what's needed. And if the question is not being asked, then the question has to be asked, well, what's the upside?
Right. So how do we change that conversation? How do we even, or is it possible to even, in Washington, let's say, because they are probably budget driven, expense driven, how do you change that conversation, or change the conversation around the country to the opportunities that are available to us with this older demographic? How do you do that? Or do you think it's possible?
I think it's going to take a long time, and it's going to be, fits and starts, and, geographically more progress here than there. The federal system is going to affect this, as to who's going to throw money at caregiving or not as a state, where these conversations happen at the legislative level, at the state level. It's going to be different. However, what I will say is that shocking, but leadership is not going to come from Washington. Washington are followers, and but there are people, of good faith, and I think on both sides of the aisle to some degree. But the going forward, I think what happens outside of Washington, at the community level, at the in the investment realm. I used to ask a very, very successful venture capitalist, whose name I won't refer to, but brilliant, absolutely brilliant. And I just said, and he was focused. His view was demographics is destiny. He was looking for investment opportunities, and he had invested, in fact, in one of the very early startups focused on this, Posit Science, Brain HQ. And I said to him, so, Steve, why, you see it, why isn't there more activity happening? And he says, because there hasn't been a big exit. People have not seen money, raining from the heavens, and therefore they're tentative, right? It's a marketplace of lemmings. And so, for example, there was one year where Andreessen Horowitz invested, actually it was Mark Andreessen, is my understanding, invested $20 million in a company called Honor.
Yes.
That came out of Google. I mean, the entrepreneur did, and it was in less than a week. Every competitor, startup competitor of the company that Andreessen invested in, got a cold call times 10.
Wow.
And it was the exact same question every time, which showed they had no clue.
Right.
Asking. And the question was, are you like Honor? Are you like your company? Are you like the company that Andreessen invested in? I don't know what you do, but are you like them? Because I want to write a check if Mark Andreessen's, writing a check. And it was, I mean, absolute lemming behavior. Just follow them,
Honor bought home instead, I believe.
They did indeed.
Yes.
Indeed, because they originally went into the market, and this was a classic startup. They went into the market thinking that the gap in the market that they needed to fill, at least to prove they could do it, not that it would be the bulk of their revenue, but their brand positioning was around the notion, if you need a caregiver, we can get you one within 2 hours.
Right.
So it was kind of like, you're in a bind, we're here to help. And then, because they were techies, they created this incredible infrastructure.
Right.
And then they started leasing the infrastructure to the industry, which gave it more efficiency. And then they realized, no. We shouldn't be providing caregivers. We should be providing all this other stuff, and buy the guys. Right.
That supply the caregivers. Right. So we have another comment here from Hillary, who said, "How can this current administration so crudely misunderstand the positive relationship between Medicare, Social Security income, senior spending, and tax paying on the economy?"
Well, I could give you my flip answer.
No, don't give us your flip answer. I can imagine.
I think my flip answer is the same answer as the serious one, actually, and that is, I don't think they care. I don't think they look at this through one lens only. This is a cost, and they cannot get out of that mindset. And as long as you're in that mindset, that's where you get the Doge type of cuts.
Correct. I agree.
Because they're focused on a number. They're not focused. I have worked in organizational change. And when you do organizational change, the first question you ask is, what's the mission of this organization?
Right.
What do we provide? And if we're going to cut costs, at a minimum, how do we cut costs, perhaps reduce, headcount, but maintain, if not improve, the level of service?
Right.
That question apparently has never been asked in this entire thing we've all been, reading about, day in, day out. It's really quite amazing for a bunch of business people.
We're supposed to be geniuses.
Forget the genius stuff. I mean, just for a bunch of business people, if you've been through any kind of organizational change, this is not the way it's done.
Correct. So now,
again, it comes back to, we don't care what the services are that are being delivered.
Or who is the recipient of those services.
We care even less about them.
Correct. So Steve says, you haven't mentioned tariffs and how it creates inflation and substantially affects those on fixed incomes, retirees.
Well, Steve, I think you just said it. I'll accept that without comment. You're absolutely correct. and it also affects those on low incomes.
Right.
Inflation is always borne the hardest by those that have the least,
Right.
and unfortunately, there's nothing new here.
Right. I just think it's can you speak to and I don't know if you're really able to do this, but some of these age technologies that have been created or that you're aware of, or what are some of the innovations that people are thinking that you envision or may come down the pike, if you can speak to that?
Well, there have been things that have been just incredibly scientific, and medical devices that require FDA approval, and things like that. There's a company called Retispec, for example, started by a great entrepreneur, and I was actually a judge at a conference. It was a pitch competition, and I voted for them. And what they have now actually come up with is so there is a connection between your retina and the ability to diagnose Alzheimer's.
Yes, I've heard that. Yep.
And this company is called Retispec, and they have a gizmo. And what they envision is that it's something that your optometrist uses when you go for your glasses, ophthalmologists use it, but it's a handheld thing that just looks into your eye. And the idea is that it becomes just part of the normal annual, checkup, vision check, whatever. But what it does is it's a diagnostic for Alzheimer's. So that's something at the very technical end. Then you had a company like Papa, which simply saw that people needed companions. They needed somebody to get tied to the grocery store, to the drugstore, whatever, to somebody to hang with, etc. And originally they started hiring college kids, and I think whatever they were paying them, it was above the market rate. The challenge there when you have people in the home is security, and I am aware of at least one problem they had, and it's terrible because it can destroy the brand. And just one case where somebody takes advantage of somebody.
Not to interject, but I actually know someone who had a situation in Connecticut where I live, with her father, with a companion. So it wasn't a home care agency, it was a companion agency. And it was such a horrific situation. She took it all the way to the police department through legal channels. And as a result of her work, it just goes to show one person can make a difference. I think it was 2 years ago, they passed in Connecticut, a law that will oversee these companion agencies because of this horrific situation, because there is no oversight for a lot of even for home care agencies. There's no oversight.
Nobody likes regulation, right?
Right.
Nobody likes to be told what to do. But unfortunately, self-regulation most of the time doesn't work.
Right.
And so, if the self-regulation is there, who needs regulation?
Right.
If it ain't.
But I would say that, and tell me if you agree with this, I would say, and there are always bad actors in everything across any industry. There are always bad actors. But I would venture to say, because people have this disparaging view of older people, that there's a greater propensity for that to occur.
I think so. I mean, they look like marks. For people who are out looking for marks, older people look like marks.
Right. You know,
I-
and
I-
if you could get away with not doing anything or not showing up or just being there or not paying attention,
Right.
and
Now, I will say that, we had a caregiver for my mom for 5 years. After my dad died, her Alzheimer's just took off. And when you talk about the image of a mama bear, protective of her cubs, this woman, an immigrant from Trinidad and brilliant sprinter, gorgeous daughter, brilliant kid. You couldn't get to my mother without, getting over this woman. This woman was so protective of my mother, kept her so engaged through the day. It was just always forcing her out to go for walks, in Manhattan where she lived. And, so I just want to say that, the caregivers out there, they work their asses off.
Oh, no doubt there are wonderful caregivers.
I just want to give props to the overwhelming majority.
I agree, because as I've said many times, Mel knows, and I've said on this program and many other places, I've worked over 50,000 hours in long-term care and skilled nursing, and there are wonderful, wonderful, wonderful caregivers. But unfortunately, as with most things, it's from Julius Caesar. The evil that men do live after them, the good is often interred with the bones. So you hear more about the bad actors, unfortunately. And
I think the more applicable one is A2 Brute.
Right. Maybe so. Maybe you're right. But anyway, listen, Jody, this has been absolutely fantastic. I mean, your insights, your knowledge, your experience, your innovative thinking. I mean, they're just invaluable. And I'm so glad you were able to offer them today for my listeners and viewers. And I'm sure they learned a lot, because every time I talk to you, I learn a lot. So this has been terrific.
Thanks so much.
So please join me next Wednesday, April 30th at 7 p.m. Eastern Time for Senior Nation to hear my conversation with my next guest, Lawrence Bill Corman. Bill, as he is known, is a serial entrepreneur, financial strategist with a 20-year career in the U.S. Navy, and he's also worked as a public servant and consultant. Bill is the founder and CEO of Built for Life Financial Agency and leads one of the top offices of the PHP agency. Bill's particular mission is to change the way we utilize our time. He teaches how to practice the philosophy of time ownership through what he calls the 168 game. So remember to tune in, comment, and ask questions on April 30th, 7 p.m. Eastern Time on the Source TV radio network. And until then, take care, stay well, and stay tuned.
Go for it. I'm just saying I'm not finished yet. Search for it, swing for it, discover the me that lives in yes. Stand for it, stretch for it. It's my time, imagine my best. Run for it, reach for it, uncover the me that lives in yes. I know, yes I know, there'll be miracles wherever I go. It's not work, it's play. I can make magic today.